When we talk about the financial services industry and technology, security and regulatory compliance are always top of mind. And now, Gen AI has entered the chat, so to speak. Generative AI is one of the most talked about technologies in recent years, and financial services institutions have only begun to scratch the surface of what Gen AI can do. The problem is, so have the bad guys, the cyber threat actors. Hi, everybody. My name is Jim Malone. I'm a contributing editor working with CIO Marketing Services, and welcome to this webcast brought to you by Splunk and featuring IDC. In this session, you'll hear some insights for improving your security posture in an AI world. We've got a great session on tap, a lot to cover, so let's dive in and meet our speakers. First, let's say hello to our IDC analyst, Jerry Silva, who's Vice President for IDC Financial Insights. Hi, Jerry. Welcome. What's keeping you busy at IDC these days?
Hi, thanks, Jim, and thanks to all the people listening. And everything is keeping me busy these days. I guess I would be what you would call a reformed banker. I've been in the industry for a long, long time. You're lucky I'm not wearing a tie at this point. That's how far back I go. And I've played roles in operations, in line of business, in IT. Today, I have the privilege of using that experience to lead a team of brilliant IDC analysts that cover technology functionality in financial services globally. In things like generative AI and AI security and so forth, in order to advise our bank clients on how to use those technologies, what kind of strategies are in place, what other ancillary things they have to worry about while they're implementing these kinds of technologies.
Excellent. Thanks so much, Jerry. Delighted you could be with us. I'm really looking forward to your commentary and insights today. Now, let's say hello to Matt Swan. Matt's a strategic advisor for Splunk, our sponsor today. Matt, welcome. Tell us a little bit about your role with Splunk.
Sure. Thanks, Jim. And thanks to everybody for joining. Look, as a strategic advisor, I get to play an incredibly interesting role, right? So I get to work deeply with some of our best customers to help them solve problems, and through the sharing of a lot of these experiences. But I also get to partner with the product and technology teams to really ensure that things, get built into Splunk kind of in the right way. And I think for me, as a former CTO, the sort of intersection of financial services and e-commerce, I've been at companies like Nubank and Amazon and Booking. But this gives it really, I get to understand a lot of the pains that those customers and product teams face because I've lived those issues. But being an advisor really gives you a pulse on the industry and enables you to make a real impact kind of inside and outside the company.
Excellent. Thanks so much, Matt. Really looking forward to your insights as well today. What a great session we have lined up. Now, before we get started, just a couple of housekeeping items to help everyone get the most out of today's session. Today's session will go like this. First, we'll hear from Jerry Silva with some recent research insights from IDC. And then we'll invite Matt into the conversation and have a nice fireside chat where we'll discuss the research and the trends and insights that you really need to be aware of as you go forward with your Gen AI initiatives. Now, to help you do that too, check out that resources section of your player. There, you'll find a lot more information on everything we're going to discuss today, plus a lot more that you can download and share with colleagues, prospects, etc. Also, you'll find a way to get in touch with our sponsor too today to really do a deep dive on today's topic. Finally, a big thanks to our sponsor, Splunk, for making today's event possible. As I mentioned, we've got a great session on tap, lots to cover. So let's get started without further ado. And to do that, I'm going to pass the mic to Jerry Silva with IDC. Jerry, over to you.
Thanks, Jim. So I thought it was important to set the context for the discussions here today, and that's around security. Predominantly among most of the new technologies that we've been talking about, whether it's cloud data operations or generative AI, as Jim mentioned. And so I'll start with one chart from a survey we did around cloud. And this is where we asked, what kind of data, what kind of concerns do you have moving your workloads to cloud? And this is global financial institutions. And so the number one factor here that they all have to consider is how sensitive is the data? And this is not only in regulated areas like in Europe, where we're talking about GDPR, this is really worldwide, where data sensitivity is the number one factor. Not to say that they won't move data to cloud, it's just the number one consideration that they look at. So that's one data point. If I look at the next one, it's around data operations and what the challenges are with managing data. As we all know in the industry, data is now coming from everywhere. We're now making credit decisions, for example, on how often do you pay your rent, or are you paying your cell phone bill on time? That expands that world of data that we're using now to make critical decisions. So what are some of the challenges with regard to managing that data? And the number one challenge, no surprise here, is the security requirements. And that goes hand in hand with privacy. That goes hand in hand with regulatory compliance, as we see with GDPR in Europe, or the privacy laws out of California. So still, security is top of mind for data operations. And then if I look at our third data point, and this is much more around what are the most significant cybersecurity challenges. So within the world of security, what are the biggest challenges? And you can see on this chart, it's identity fraud, it's synthetic identity, it's phishing attacks. Those have really, really increased tremendously. It's data breach, something that we've had to deal with for a long, long time. Distributed denial of service, ransomware. So these are the top cybersecurity issues that financial institutions are really struggling with. And so that kind of gives you a context for this discussion about, well, where do we go from here? What are some of the solutions? How do partnerships play a role? And really, how do you prioritize and what are the next steps going forward?
Excellent. Thanks, Jerry. Let's get Matt Swan involved in the conversation. Matt, some great nuggets from Jerry there. What's resonating from the Splunk point of view? What are you hearing from the market, from the clients, from your clients, that is?
Yeah, I mean, look, there's no question that data sensitivity and security, they're top of mind, right? And we've seen it. Cloud has become more pervasive, with AI, as data has become more pervasive and more of a sort of first class citizen. What we've seen is that things are becoming more distributed, and that opens up a more complex kind of threat landscape, and that landscape is changing rapidly. And so I think, look, regulations and standards, they kind of aim to help, but they can also provide a burden, right? I mean, it's more things to kind of comply with and more ways to kind of manage this. And those things don't always pace kind of in the same way. So I think this is really critical because security events around data, in my opinion, like they could become a customer extinction event. I think, customers, they can more easily forgive a brief outage or kind of interruptions. But when you think about data loss, and it's a core trust issue, and especially when it comes to people's money. And so I think, you make investments in these systems, and sometimes you work with other platforms and, kind of players, because you also need to leverage what's happening in the market, and not just the benefits of what you're seeing, for yourself.
Excellent. Thanks, Matt. Jerry, I want to pick up on something that you mentioned in your research, kind of two seemingly conflicting data points. Banks tell you data sensitivity, number one consideration, but they also tell you that security is one of the top benefits they get by moving to the cloud. This reminds me of, years ago, the debut of the cloud. There were concerns about security, and then the thought was, well, who's going to have better security, me or a giant cloud provider, right? So how has that evolved? And Jerry, can you explain that kind of seemingly contradiction?
Yeah, it does sound a little confusing, doesn't it? I think the way to start is to think about financial services as probably the most heavily regulated industry out there. And to Matt's point, it's all about trust. So the one thing I would argue, the one product that financial institutions have are not checking accounts, they're not insurance policies, it's trust. The consumer or the corporate places their trust in that particular institution. So data security, data sensitivity is the number one, the first and foremost consideration in every decision that these institutions make. But the challenge is, and Matt started talking about this, was it's not only the data side, but the entire digital infrastructure is expanding. It's becoming much more complex. It used to be that an institution would have its own data center, its own compute, its own storage, and everything else. Now we're expanding to third-party providers, we're expanding to cloud providers, and all the way out to the edge. So that makes it much more complex, and you've got vectors of threat everywhere within this expanding technology, within this expanding infrastructure. So, and at the same time, the bad actors are getting better at using the same technologies that the institutions are using. So how do you keep up with that? And I think what we're finding is, even though data sensitivity is the number one consideration, what institutions are finding is that, to your point, those cloud providers, those external third-party security providers, are better at security than they can possibly be, with very minor exceptions. If you're a huge trillion-dollar bank, you may have your own security folks, but otherwise 99.9% of the other institutions need to rely on those external partners that can find the right people, that have the right technologies, that can keep up with your SLAs. So I think that's where these banks are finally understanding that, yes, we're actually getting security benefits by moving security to external providers. The one caveat here is, this is something I always say, again, as an ex-banker, this kind of triggers me. At the end of the day, it's still the institution that is held to the regulation. It's not the third-party provider. And so the institution has to be completely comfortable with, who are you as a provider? What are you doing to enhance or maintain my security, my digital trust with my customer base? So there's still that kind of balance between, yes, I'm still afraid because data is really, really sensitive. But on the other hand, I have seen benefits there. I just have to go about leveraging those benefits in a very controlled manner.
Yeah, and Matt, from where you sit at Splunk, are you seeing that same? Is that contradiction an issue? Anything you want to add about that explanation?
Yeah, I mean, look, I think the contradiction's obvious. I think people with all of these sort of waves of innovation and technology, I mean, folks really have to embrace, both the good and the bad, or the pros and the cons of these things. And I think that for the most part, it requires people to kind of lean in and really step up. If you think about, um, moving data to the cloud, can make you better, that also can introduce some risk. And those are things you have to step up and kind of manage. And what that means is, look, you've got to look heavily at, the provider security practices, like when you go to these third parties. But you need to be driven, these things need to be driven by your specific needs. And obviously, you've got to look at the regulatory environment. I mean, as Jerry was saying, like, this is financial services, one of the most heavily regulated kind of industries. But it requires you to also step up and kind of manage and monitor your data more effectively, right? And that's where really leveraging tools and platforms that make it easy for you to ingest that data, to transparently see and learn and kind of derive the insights, are going to help you step up and kind of be in a better position. So I think, look, companies that have good planning and due diligence, they get all the advantages that Jerry was mentioning, right? These third party platforms and providers, they're investing a lot of money, they're seeing a lot of the market, their time to market to get after these improvements and things can outweigh your ability to do it solely on your own. And then this more open, transparent, distributed world, you just have to be aware of that, and you have to make sure you're as good as those providers and holding them kind of to the right standard.
Let's dig into that external provider question a little bit, Matt. Security is so important to a bank or insurance company, which we've established through Jerry's research. Why would a financial institution, especially a big one with lots of resources, why would they come to an external partner to help with security? It's one thing to get help managing your containers, for example, but
Yeah.
security seems a little more high stakes. Why would they do that?
Well, look, I think it's kind of two words of, there's never enough. I mean, like, as things become more open and distributed, like, my opinion, if you have the most or best data, you can make the most informed and kind of best decisions. And I think what you're seeing with so many people embracing kind of these more kind of open systems and whatnot, what you see even with security, it's all about the time to identify these issues and to contain, or kind of remediate, kind of those issues. And, there are benefits to these third parties at scale. And so I think, look, the outsourcing, it can really strengthen your overall posture and resilience. It can help in the identification, of things, and especially in particular with AI, this evolving, cyber threat that's out there. You want to make sure you're not, standing alone. And I do think it's also, I think there is specialized expertise. I think there are some benefits of cost kind of at scale. And I think when you put all these things together, it has to be one of the tools in your toolkit.
Yeah, yeah. Jerry, love to get your input. Given that you spent half your career at banks, maybe you can put on your banker necktie for a second and offer insights from your point of view.
Right.
Any more nuances here? What can we add?
Well, yeah, I mean, first of all, I agree with everything Matt said, right? The environment is increasingly complex. It's getting bigger and bigger. It's more open, to his point. It's much more open than it used to be. In fact, financial institutions are actually depending on partnerships between either peers or non-peers. Banking as a service, for example, embedded finance. So now they're reaching out and actually creating partnerships with non-financial organizations. It increases the number of vectors that bad actors can come in from. There are a number of factors, though, that come into play when you're talking about externalizing or giving your security operations to an external provider. The first one, I mentioned this before, if you're a very large institution, trillion-dollar bank, trillion-dollar insurance company, you probably have a lot of the staff internally that can help you with this. But those costs continue to increase, just like Matt said. It becomes a cost issue at that point. It becomes a scale issue. To what extent can you take a fixed number of employees like that and look at, okay, what happens if we introduce a large language model and Gen AI models into the organization? Do we have enough staff now to do that, or do we have to hire more people? So from that perspective, it makes sense to look at an outside provider. They're going to keep up with technology a lot more. They're going to be able to find the staff necessary to explore new security technologies. But ultimately, I think it boils down to one question. This is the question or the statement that I always kind of bristle at. Every time I hear a financial organization say, we're actually a technology company that does banking, I want to pull every dime of money out of that bank as possible. I don't want them to be security experts. I want them to be trusted organizations, but I want them to focus on the business of financial services, products and services, right? That's where I want them to work. And I think it started, when we first started talking about cloud, I think that's the way it was going. They would give some of their functionality to the cloud providers because they said, well, it's not very critical and we're going to try it for a while and see how it works. I think we're getting to that stage now where even critical workloads like security, cybersecurity, they're getting more and more comfortable saying, yes, the external providers can actually do a better job here. And so what that allows them to do now is focus back on the business of banking, back on the business of trading or wealth management, back on the business of insurance. And so I think that comes into play, that sudden realization or that maybe evolving realization that this is not something that we have to focus on. In fact, there are other people outside of us that can do a better job.
So, Jerry, you guys have both mentioned challenges, and we're at that point in the adoption curve for things like AI where folks are having to make investment decisions, right? And it's not just AI or Gen AI, there's lots of emerging technologies competing for those IT investment dollars. So, when we think about pouring money into technologies like Gen AI, what is the value of investing into security right now? What are some of the factors that really are driving?
Well, you hit the nail on the head. The latest one, and I would argue this is not the only one to your point, is generative AI. It's just an example of a new technology that can potentially open up vulnerabilities. I mean, lots of benefits. We're talking institutions about running pilots and proof of concepts, and they're seeing the benefits of something like Gen AI, but it does open those vulnerabilities. The same thing was true when cloud was starting to be adopted, right? We were worried about vulnerabilities there. And go as far back as you want. Again, in my long tenure, I saw the rise of online banking. I saw the rise of mobile banking. I saw the rise of ATMs. At each of those points, you opened up potential vulnerabilities. And so with every new introduction, and even traditional AI, every new introduction of a new technology opens up more and more vulnerabilities. And as we mentioned before, I think Matt brought up this point, is the scale. Can you keep up with the scale of those vulnerabilities as you're introducing brand new technologies? One of the ways that we're trying to combat that is by making security an enterprise-wide strategy, not just a point solution attached to mobile banking or a point solution attached to your AI models. It has to be an enterprise-wide strategy. I will give you one kind of frightening statistic that we got from a survey we ran, I think in December or January, where we asked financial institutions globally, how do you plan on paying for initiatives in generative AI? And this was, I mean, after my experience in the industry, this was really scary. More than half of the institutions said that they would aggressively cut other programs in order to fund generative AI. Now, as a banker, my first thought was, well, gosh, where do I cut, right? Which programs do I cut? The one thing they can't cut outright is security, but they could certainly look at it and say, can we improve the scale of security? Can we improve the enterprise-wide breadth of our security operations by moving it, for example, to external partners or modernizing it to some extent? So I think that's why you're going to see continued investments in security operations, particularly in the use of partners, in order to free up those funds so that you can go after things like generative AI or AI models or reducing fraud, improving the other areas by cutting back or making it more efficient to run security operations.
It's very interesting, and I'm wondering, Matt, in your engagements, what are you seeing as far as the investments go in security? What are they concerned about, and how is that playing out?
Yeah, I think it's interesting, man. Similar to what Jerry's saying, like when I say the hype is real, everyone is top of mind for how we invest in these, new technologies like generative AI and kind of and whatnot. And I do think for banks are seeing that you can streamline operations, you can improve decision making. There's efficiency plays, you can improve customer interactions. And it's increasingly as the world becomes more digital, it's a more competitive and data driven financial landscape. So when you think about security, though, I don't know how much of a choice you have because if you're not doing it, the other guy is probably doing it. So I think generative AI, look, you can analyze network traffic and patterns to introduce, all these, you can identify all these potential cybersecurity issues. By continuously learning from this new data, these models are going to enhance your security posture and help protect that information. And I think at some level, when I say it's not a choice, you have to make that investment. It goes back to that trust is at the core of what financial services kind of do. And I do think you probably saw this, in the last 10, 20 years with the advent of cloud and kind of an e-commerce and a lot of these digital innovation waves. Initially, they were not all profitable and rich kind of day one. But over time, through scale and kind of an iteration, they became more cost effective and efficient. And I think that's what you're going to see here also with Gen AI. We're going to learn through this cycle of being less certain and making bets around the productivity and kind of the economics of this. But my sense is it will play out. And I think with security, it's not going to be much of a choice.
Yeah, interesting. So, Jerry, we've talked a lot about the details of Gen AI, some of the potential. What are some of the challenges? There must be some challenges, even for big banks or any organization that have bought in and they're on board with modernizing their security operations. What are some of those challenges that stand in the way of getting those benefits that we've talked
I think it really comes down to one thing. It's a critical thing, but it's one thing, and that's what's the institution's new role with regard to its brand new security operations, a modernized security environment. The institution is not going to play the same role it did before. You're not going to necessarily hire kind of in the weeds security professionals to be able to help maintain that digital trust that you have with your customers. But you may have to beef up areas like compliance or governance, third party risk management. So the institution has to recognize that this may be an improvement in our security posture overall, but we now need to play a different role than we used to when we're modernizing. We're working with an external provider, perhaps. Our roles have changed. We need maybe new people or retraining some of the older people to do different jobs. That kind of cultural change is difficult in many, many institutions. So I think that'll be probably the number one challenge in the modernization of any kind of security operation is what's my new role? Who am I fundamentally going forward? So that I can still maintain that support, the partnership with the external provider, and still maintain that digital trust for my customers.
Yeah, Matt, that seems like kind of a huge question. The culture, it comes up in all these emerging technologies, the cultural issues that we've always done it this way, kind of legacy thinking. What are you seeing in your engagements with your clients? Are they getting through those? How have they addressed those?
Yeah, I mean, look, I think for companies that are more adept at constant change they still have these same issues. You're still on that change curve, but they're just more adept at kind of dealing with it. I think it's kind of interesting, with AI. Um, you know, part of this is just we're getting comfortable with trust in the systems, right? I mean, Jerry talked about our roles are changing, the company's role is changing, kind of what they're going to do. Well, we're giving more trust and empowering these systems more, and so I think there's a natural, you know, do I trust the system? Is the right result coming out? Has it been skewed kind of in some way? I think very quickly we are seeing those systems mature and kind of getting more comfort. But I think as part of working through this with people in their roles, it's like, how do you build trust, not just with customers, but with the AI, systems themselves? And I think that's where, people will have fear about, we talk a lot about, well, AI will displace all of these jobs. I mean, possibly. I think the jobs will change and evolve, and I think people need to change and evolve with them. And sometimes that means skills and training, but also, we've seen this, doesn't matter with cloud or, anything else. There is this sort of cultural resistance to automation because people feel like they built and created something, right, that they have pride in, and you don't want that to change. But so I do think people, more than anything, I think are investing in the people part of this change versus the, just looking at the technology in and of itself.
I want to pick up on something Matt said, which I think is really important, really interesting. We talked to one bank in Europe, a large bank in Europe, who put a generative AI platform in front of their contact center agents. And when we talked to their CIO, he said, this is not about productivity for us. This is about proficiency because our agents are actually learning from the generative AI platform on how to work with customers, which I thought was brilliant. Their contact center agents also said, you know what the best thing about this is? Instead of taking notes or typing to a keyboard, I can actually focus on what the customer is saying. So there are tons of benefits associated with something like generative AI, as long as the institution can focus on that. Well, how do we make sure that that application, that workload, can be trusted?
Thanks so much. We are almost at the end of our time for this session. We've been chatting with Jerry Silva with IDC, Matt Swan, strategic advisor for Splunk. Gentlemen, again, a couple of minutes left. So let's finish with some final thoughts and guidance. We'll start with you, Jerry. I know IDC core mission, provide guidance to the financial service to the industry. Here we're talking financial services, obviously. So what do you tell your clients with respect to improving their security and resilience, given that is the technology trends, the market that we're in today?
I think it goes back to that challenge I talked about. It's the cultural change, right? It's figuring out what role do I play now, or what role do the people play in the security operations. It's a strategic discussion that has to happen at the highest levels, regardless of initiative. When we were talking about digital transformation, for example, those institutions that were achieving it and achieving it well is because it started at the CEO and worked its way down. It was an enterprise-wide change. So number one, that's where I would begin, right? Have those conversations, determine strategically how security operations are going to work out and what your new role is as an organization in the security operations. After that, I won't say it becomes easier, but it does become a little easier. You've got now a direction. Everybody in the organization is marching to the same pace. This is when you start looking at providers, talk to your peers, talk to firms like ours for guidance to figure out what are the technologies, what are the challenges, what have other people done, what are some of the case studies where it's worked out well, where institutions have had success. And that's when, once you've gotten that direction, once you've gotten that information, that research done on your own, then you can start looking to see, okay, how do I prioritize the workloads? How do I look at external providers? Again, talking to peers, who else have you used? What areas am I going to attack first? If you're lucky, you can attach some KPI to success. How do I know this is all going to work out at the end? So it's really that top-down approach that we tell our institutions, this is the way you really have to look at things. And for every institution, they're all individuals. They're going to be at a different level of adoption. So we talk to them at that level.
Excellent. Thanks so much, Jerry. Really great advice. Matt Swan, you get last word today. If I'm a IT decision maker, I've got Gen AI on my mind. I've got automation on my mind. but mostly I've got security on my mind. So, what are your key takeaways from our conversation today that you want to leave our audience
Yeah, look, I think that we've talked about this a bit. Like AI is just another wave of innovation, right? But we must adapt to it, right? We've got to embrace it. I think we've seen people go through this journey, with cloud, with other technologies, and look, I just like to apply really first principles thinking when I think about kind of AI or any other technology, right? I mean, I want to put on my customer hat. I want to break down these complex problems into very fundamental principles, and I want to focus on building those solutions from the ground up. But I think you really, more than ever now, have to pay attention to the market, stay close to those third parties, because I think what you're seeing is as much money and innovation as you can throw at something. You go back to the scale problem or kind of our opportunity. You've got players that are out there that have a much broader view, that have a much broader lens. And so the question is, how can you partner to get help, to accelerate your own kind of growth and development, just with that technology and innovation.
Excellent. Thanks so much, Matt. Unfortunately, that brings us to the end of our time for this session. We've been chatting with Jerry Silver with IDC, Matt Swan, strategic advisor with Splunk. Thanks to you both for your insights and expertise. Really interesting conversation. And of course, thanks to everyone who tuned in. Now, before we go, I want to give you a quick reminder of the resources section of your player. Everything our experts discussed today, use the discussion as a jumping off point to find out more through that resources section. You can download those resources. You can find a way to get in touch with our sponsor through that resources section. So please do take advantage of that. And with that, we're at the end of our time. For Splunk CIO Marketing Services, Jim Malone saying, thanks everyone for tuning in.